Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of... Well, since Trick or Treat is right around the corner, I'm going to use this opportunity to continue forward with my Halloween book lineup and review All Hallows by Christopher Golden. Which, if you haven't read this book before, I really feel like it can fit into the subgenres of folk horror, supernatural suspense, supernatural drama, and coming of age. Now, before I get started, I would just like to note that my loving husband, Carrie, gifted All Hallows to me as a birthday present earlier this year. And as soon as I unwrapped this book, I knew for a fact that I needed to read it this year for my Halloween lineup.
Hey.
Carrie, I was just speaking fondly of you. Please don't screw anything up.
I pulled another tarot card for you.
Is there anything in this deck that's good? The tower. What the hell does the tower mean?
Here's some candy while I look it up.
This is going to be bad, I know it.
Oh, okay. It means danger, crisis, destruction, and a time of unforeseen change.
Oh, Reese's. Ah! Ah! So, moving along, I would like to add that I buddy read this with my good online friends Hanny, Nisa, and Blake, as well as my good friend Tammy and my husband Carrie. And as always, I had an overall great experience. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs, but more importantly, I really had a blast with the deep discussions that this book caused us to have. So, if any of you are watching, I hope you enjoy this review. Anywho, before the 31st passes us by, let's rewind to Halloween night in the 1980s and see what horrors are stalking the families on Parmenter Road. All Hallows by Christopher Golden opens up on Halloween Day. And as the hours pass into evening, the readers are introduced to 6 suburban families known as the Barbosas, the Sweeneys, the Suarezes, the Montezes, the Koenigs, and the Verges. Now, to kickstart this series of events that leads to Parmenter Road running red with blood, everything begins with Tony Barbosa and his daughter Chloe setting up their annual Haunted Woods attraction behind their house. Which, it's during their setup that Tony catches a glimpse of a young mysterious girl who appears to be from an older time as she's running through the woods. However, instead of thinking anything unusual, Tony shrugs it off and considers it's just a random child having fun. Then, a few hours later, when the youngest Barbosa child named Rick goes trick-or-treating with his friend Billy, everything seems like a typical Halloween night. But as they roam around Parmenter Road, eventually they realize that they're being followed by a strange teenage boy in a scarecrow costume. Meanwhile, as they're being stalked, a domestic dispute between Donnie Sweeney and his wife Barb reaches its climax, which in turn causes the youngest of the Sweeney children by the name of Charlie to seek refuge in a secret fort in the woods. Yet, while he's hiding, he encounters a peculiar young girl who warns him about a predator being on the loose called the Cunning Man. From here, Rick and Billy rescue an odd boy from 2 sexual predators. And once they're alone, the boy explains to them about the Cunning Man, and how if they want to survive this Halloween, all they have to do is avoid the Cunning Man until midnight, because once the clock strikes 12, the Cunning Man will have no other choice but to return to the underworld known as Dubnos. But until then, nobody is safe. In interviews conducted by Castle Talk Media and Atomic Geekdom, which are both linked in the description section of this episode, Golden explained that he set All Hallows in 1984 due to nostalgic purposes, which it was during that year that Golden was a 17-year-old high school senior, much like some of the protagonists in his book. Character wise, Golden admitted that Donnie and Barb were influenced by his own parents, and similar to the character of Vanessa, the author's sister had come out to him as a lesbian at a young age. Inspiration for Parameter Road came to Golden as this was influenced by the subdivision that he grew up in as a child. As far as the story is concerned, Golden praised Stephen King's Salem's Lot for inspiring All Hallows with its plot building and pacing. And since All Hallows is full of characters, Golden noted each chapter is named after a character to make it easier for the reader to follow along. Yet the largest character in All Hallows is the neighborhood. When elaborating on the supernatural elements of the story, Golden said he deliberately left out 95% of Dubnos, the Cunning Man, Carmen, and the Witch's Spawn because it was unnecessary to know fine detail about them in order to experience what was happening to the main characters. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about the Celtic lore in All Hallows. In Celtic lore, it was said the universe was divided into 3 parts. Among these were the upper world, also known as heaven or the white world. Then there was Earth itself with living beings. And last, there was the lower world, also known as hell, the black world, or the deep world. Druids believed there were many entries into the lower world that they called Dubnos. These gateways included, but were not limited to, cemeteries, caverns, megaliths, sacred wells, marshes, and more. Druids also believed that the powers of the underworld were more potent during the dark months of winter, and the gods and goddesses of this realm wielded power over fertility, wisdom, sorcery, death, and rebirth. Another Celtic subject that this book mentions is that of a witch named Carmen who lives in the underworld of Dubnos. Lore explains that Carmen resided in Athens, and her goal was to take over Ireland with her 3 sons, who represented darkness, evil, and violence. By working her golden scythe, Carmen unleashed spells of blight and disease, which covered berries with fungus, turned apples sour and bitter, filled roots for cooking with venomous worms, and caused animals to become ill and give no milk. However, a supernatural race in Irish mythology known as the Tribe of the Gods or the Tuatha Dé Danann assembled 4 heroes, 3 men and a woman to match the battle against Carmen and her sons. And during battle, for every horror done by Carmen, the Tuatha inflicted the same upon her, which led to her defeat. Yet, with the battle won, they gave Carmen a choice, so that she and her sons could either die on the spot, or they would be bound in the abyss of the north until the sea no longer surrounded Ireland. Since there were no other options, she chose banishment. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoilers segment, which, if you haven't read this before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few of my favorite moments. First up is the cat and mouse scene between Ruth and the Cunning Man. Now, prior to this, Ruth and her husband Zach had lured a young boy by the name of Leonard into their home so they could molest him. But before anything happens, Rick and his friend Billy are able to rescue him. From there, Zach chases them into the woods where he's killed by the cunning man. And after he doesn't return home, Ruth goes looking for him where she comes upon his mangled corpse. Yet before she can rationalize what's going on, she's approached by the cunning man, who's described as this towering robed figure with flame-like eyes and a voice that sounds like a choir of children. Well, after Ruth hauls ass back home to gather her belongings so she can live off the grid, she has some pretty unsettling encounters with phantom voices and a reanimated boy. Even still, she is actually able to make it to her car. But before she can leave the garage, she discovers that her garage door won't open. Then, after she gets out to try to open the door by using its drawstring, she hears a choir of dead children drift towards her from the kitchen. And when she turns around, she sees this rickety, thin, robed figure staring at her. And after they share this brief moment of silence, he chases her down the street while she's screaming bloody murder. Y'all, this whole sequence was so badass because not only did I love the intensity factor behind Ruth getting chased, but the cunning man's description was pure nightmare fuel. Like, in my mind, I imagine him being the 7 or 8 foot tall, hulking, robed figure, and in his hooded area, there's nothing but a black void with these two fiery eyes looking out from that blackness. Which it actually reminded me of how the Grim Reaper was drawn in that old black and white Mickey Mouse cartoon called Haunted House. Which, to be perfectly honest, the way the Grim Reaper was depicted in that cartoon scared the hell out of me as a kid, so it makes sense why I would feel this way about the Cunning Man. Also, even though Ruth and Zach weren't characters that I rooted for, after I saw what the Cunning Man was capable of, I was afraid for the well-being of the characters that I did care about. And as a side note, I would just like to add that after I read this, there were a few evenings where I had to go outside at night, and I'm not gonna lie, I was looking over my shoulder left and right because I was so afraid that the cunning man was in my yard, which I know that is completely absurd, but you're talking to a person who was afraid that there was a great white shark in the city swimming pool when I was a kid. So, yeah, it is what it is. My second favorite moment was Sarah Jane's death, which, prior to this, the Sweeney family had taken in a young mysterious girl by the name of Sarah, who had earlier warned Charlie about the cunning man. And even though Barb felt like she was doing the right thing by keeping Sarah hidden in her house, eventually Sarah comes up from behind and pushes her down the cellar stairs, where she gets knocked unconscious. After that, Sarah drags Charlie from his house with the intent to sacrifice him to a witch named Carmen, who lives in the underworld known as Dubnos, which, upon offering him up, this would grant Sarah an additional year of life. Yet, as the abduction is going down, Donnie, who had earlier been possessed by the cunning man, realizes that his family's in trouble. So, meanwhile, as he's running home to save the day, Barb comes to at the exact moment when her eldest son, Brian, sees Charlie being taken from their house. Then, by the time Donnie arrives, everyone's out on the front lawn trying to save Charlie. And while Sarah isn't fazed by Brian or Barb, being confronted by Donnie is a completely different story. Now, at first, Sarah thinks she can get away with everything by threatening to kill Charlie if Donnie doesn't back away. However, that threat doesn't work at all because Donnie runs over to her, grabs her by her throat, shakes the ever-loving living hell out of her, rams his hand down her throat, yanks out a bramble of black thorns, and as soon as these thorns hit air, they begin to rot and wither. And, of course, by him yanking this crap out of her throat, it causes the little hellion to finally die. This moment caused my adrenaline to pump because I honestly thought Charlie was going to die. Like, I had just gotten used to the idea that Rick had been killed a few pages prior when I thought Rick was actually going to be the hero of this book. But of course, after he had his heart ripped out, I realized everyone was fair game. And when Sarah grabbed Charlie and started dragging him out of the house, all I could think was, holy crap, he is done for it. And even though he wasn't a favorite character of mine, I still cared about what happened to him because he wasn't an asshole or anything. He was just a little kid. So, yeah, I absolutely love how the author was playing with me throughout all of this and how it just kept me on the edge of my seat. And speaking of surprises, I would like to note that I did not anticipate the Cunning Man to be a good guy or a moderator, if you will. But even though I did warm up to the Cunning Man a little bit, his appearance still creeped me the hell out, especially by how he was described when he was wearing Donnie as a meat suit. So, yeah, major kudos to Golden for constantly upping the WTF factor and providing moments that I will never be able to unsee. My final favorite moment was the grand finale. Now, prior to this, all of the dead kids had either lured or forced their sacrifices into the area near the black thorn tree that had opened up into a doorway between our world and Dubnos. Which it was during this time that the Barbosas had talked Donnie into returning Rick to them, because even though Rick had been killed by Leonard, he had actually come back to life as the witch's spawn. Then, after the Barbosas restrain Rick, Tony follows Donnie to the Black Thorn Tree to find where two of the dead kids are trying to force Vanessa and Julia into its opening. Which it's at this point that Donnie explains to the dead kids that they need to release Julia and Vanessa and return to the witch empty-handed. Now, although the dead girl Delilah argues that the witch will punish them if they return empty-handed, Donnie explains that what the witch has in store for them will be nothing compared to what he's going to do if they don't mind. Which, after he makes this threat, Leonard pretty much returns inside of the tree without any further argument. However, Delilah attacks Donnie, then after she's able to break away from him, she makes a run for Vanessa and Julia. Yet before she can actually reach them, Tony grabs his shovel and smashes her in the face with it. And this blow is so hardcore, it causes her skull to cave in. Y'all, so much shit went down leading up to this moment. I can't even. And not just speaking for myself, but for everyone who read this book with me, when we got to this stage of the game, there was no turning back. Like, we could not put the book down. It was like just the point of no return, and I was warned before I got to this area that once you start, you can't stop. And just to give you some context on how serious this shit was, what I just described went over the total of 8 or 9 chapters. And these weren't short chapters either. I mean, they weren't like really, really long, but they also weren't like 2 or 3 pages long. So, yeah, that was pretty damned intense. Not to mention, throughout this entire time, the author did not allow his reader a single breather. Also, I really loved how most of the protagonists put up a good fight. And because of their will to live, we were given quite a few epic moments, especially like what we see near the end of this book. Even still, I was on the edge of my seat because there was a time where I thought the evil was going to win, because after Rick and Steve died, I really just felt like anyone was fair game. With that said, I would like to add that my friends and I discussed the ending of this book quite a bit, especially how everything had been pinned on Ruth and Zach. And yeah, I do agree with my friend Blake that Ruth and Zach being used as scapegoats did seem like it was a quick and easy way for the author just to nicely wrap everything up and put a bow on top. But at the same time, I'm okay with that because these characters went through so much shit, like just emotional hell from beginning to end. And I was really happy to see that they were able to continue on with their lives in other ways. But at the same time, as we were discussing the different possibilities of how this book could have ended, I realized that had everything been pinned on Tony or Vanessa, which, by the way, are two of the characters who I really loved, I would have been devastated. Like, I still would have loved the book, but I just would not have felt relieved. And, sometimes it's good to not feel relieved after you read something heavy. But it just seems like at this particular time in my life, this was the ending that I was happy with. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch. And at the top of my list are those two sick bastards who give perverts a bad name. That's right, I'm talking about Ruth and Zach Verges. Now, I understand that they were molested and groomed as children, and I am sorry for that because no person deserves to go through that shit, and I wish that the abusers could have been strung up by their damn balls. But at this point in the game, Ruth and Zach are grown ass adults, and they are doing the exact same thing to children that was done to them. And yeah, they might claim they feel guilty and shit, but obviously they don't feel guilty enough because they keep doing the same crap over and over. And since I saw they had no plans on changing who they were or trying to get help, I cheered when the cunning man dropped them both on their wet asses. Another asshole I'd like to bitch about is that rancid douchewater known as Donnie. Now, some people might be like, but Alex, he redeemed himself. He saved his children. No, no. Let me tell you something about Donnie. Yeah, he saved his children and had one redeeming moment, which that does not mean he was completely redeemed. He just had one redeeming moment where he saved his rugrats and proved he wasn't a complete narcissist. Still, this does not make up for the fact that he screwed everything with two legs, made his wife out to be a complete damn fool, hit her, and then body slammed his daughter on the front lawn like he was trying out for pro wrestling. And the thing is, this asshole is the piece of shit who, if he's going down, he's going to take as many people with him as he can because he's just miserable like that. And I know you know what I'm talking about because you've met assholes like this before. And to be completely honest, when this walking venereal disease had his ass handed to him, the only one thing I wish could have happened a little bit more is I wish he could have been just humiliated a little bit more. Just a little bit more before the cunning man took him over. Well, now that my bitching has been satisfied, I would like to add that my friends and I had some pretty deep discussions about why the cunning man decided to wear Donnie's pretty little ass as a meat suit. And yeah, we understand that the cunning man only kills shitheads, which is why he killed Ruth and Zach. But the question remains, why did he possess Donnie and not Ruth or Zach? Well, one of the answers that we came up with was Donnie was a bad person, but he wasn't bottom of the barrel trash like Ruth and Zach. So it was either that or the cunning man decided that he would have much rather have a face that looked like a great value porn star versus a face that looked like a skeezy sex fiend. All Hallows by Christopher Golden was the perfect supernatural novel for this time of year. And while it provided unforgettable characters, there were also characters that were layered and complex. And as far as themes are concerned, this work commented on quite a few different subjects, some of which include neighborhood drama, victims becoming victimizers, children being more aware of mature issues than what adults realize, happy places becoming tainted, and coming to terms with who you are. Also, as an added bonus, this book presents some pretty awesome Celtic lore. Character wise, this book caused my friends and I to have quite a few deep debates about the layered personalities that Golden created. And while we went back and forth in regards to how we felt about some of the antagonist and the protagonist, this made me realize that not only did Golden know how to write a great Halloween novel, but he knew how to create complex characters that could lead to lengthy discussions. And while some might argue that he focused a little too much on the character development, I really think that he used his page time wisely because all of the backstories and subplots really made me become more invested in the well being of the protagonist. Theme wise, All Hallows did a fantastic job building tension with its suburban drama. And because of how involved it made us feel with everyone's secret lives and conflicts, it seemed like we were right there in that neighborhood amongst a gossip circle. Which, let's be completely honest, who doesn't love some juicy gossip every now and then? But regardless of there being feuding neighbors and domestic disputes, this book felt like it had a good sense of community. For example, even though there were a few jerks, it seemed like everyone came together pretty well to support Barbossa's haunted woods. Also, there were quite a few moments where neighborhood children were trick or treating together in groups, and they were in areas where they knew everybody. Which, because of the vibe that came with these moments, it returned me to a few Halloweens throughout my childhood and really caused me to reminisce over some fond memories. Aside from that, a theme that Nisa and I noticed was how some victims become victimizers, which this is especially seen in two different ways throughout the book. One of which regard the characters Ruth and Zach, who, even though they had been molested as children, they grew up to be pedophiles themselves. Now, this was really a complicated subplot that caused all of us to go back and forth as to why Ruth and Zach would do this to children after it had been done to them. Like, at first, we considered perhaps this was their way of gaining a power trip. Then we started to wonder if perhaps deep within their subconscious they were corrupting innocence as a form of revenge or they were doing it out of jealousy. And we also considered that perhaps they were doing this because of how they had been groomed as children. Even still, with that in mind, we see where a destructive cycle has been created, and out of the children that Ruth and Zach have molested, some of them have the potential to now grow up as predators. Other than that, we notice where the topic of victims becoming victimizers was strong with the witch's spawn, which I honestly wish I could elaborate a little bit more here, but if I did, I would reveal some spoilers, so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Just simply trust that the topic is there. Another subject that came into play was one that Carrie and I enjoyed discussing, which this regards how children can be more aware of mature issues than what adults seem to realize. For example, with the character Vanessa, she knew by age 13 that she was a lesbian and she accepted that. As a matter of fact, she started getting her ducks in a row for what would happen after she came out to her parents. Which her emotional state was totally relatable for me because I was around 12 or 13 when I realized I was gay, even though I didn't come out until I was like 15 or 16, somewhere about there. But aside from her, I also noticed where this subject was strong with the characters of Billy and Rick, as even though they were adolescents, they knew danger when they saw danger, and they did everything they could to protect Leonard from Ruth and Zach. Yet, this subject is at strongest with the Sweeney children when they come to realize exactly what kind of a man their father is. And while the youngest of the bunch is aware enough to understand that their father isn't a good family man, he's also aware enough that their mother is at fault for their home life as well. Which this is seen because their mother allows their father to treat her like trash as much as he wants. However, when she has had it up to here, she explodes and they get into a huge argument where nothing ever gets resolved and things only get worse. Not to mention, she actually involves their children in their arguments. Also, this book has quite a few deaths that occur on Halloween. And because of that, I think it's pretty safe to assume that any of the characters who loved Halloween and they experienced having a loved one die on that day, I don't believe they're going to be able to enjoy that holiday the same way again without remembering the emotions they felt when tragedy struck. On that sad and depressing note, I think All Hallows does a great job of showing how one fiasco can ruin the fond memories of somebody's favorite place or holiday after they had been tainted. And I think this is something that a lot of readers can relate to, especially if they've had a loved one who's passed away near a holiday, and from there on out, that holiday causes them to grieve instead of feel happiness. Then, as for a final subject, Hanny and I noticed that this book focused on the idea of coming to terms with who you are. Which, of course, this sounds like a good thing. However, this work proves that not every circumstance is a positive one. Like, for example, on one hand, we have Vanessa, who has accepted the fact that she's a lesbian and nothing's going to change that. Which, in her circumstance, this is a good thing because she has decided to be true to herself and continue forward in life as a happy person. Yet, on the other hand, we have Ruth and Zach, who have accepted themselves as being pedophiles. And even though they have moments of guilt, these moments aren't enough to actually make them stop doing what they're doing. As a matter of fact, they've become so comfortable with themselves, they have concocted a game plan to escape in case things get too risky. Which, obviously, none of what they're doing is a good thing. And if you're the kind of person who has accepted the fact that you are harming people in any way, shape, or form, then you need to come to terms with the bad that you're doing, stop what you're doing, and get professional help. Also, we have Donnie's character who realizes that his family is better off without him because he's accepted the fact that he's a womanizing alcoholic who has no plans to change. And even though him leaving his family is probably better for them because he's not humiliating them any further or hurting them any more, this is going to cause more damages in the long run because he's taking the coward's way out. Like, as a father, he has a responsibility, but instead, he just dumps his kids on his wife and decides to go live his life to his fullest, which is not fair to anyone. So, yeah, he's a really selfish character, and I really feel like he chose his vices over what was more important. Aside from themes, this book did present Celtic lore. And while my friends and I discussed this aspect of the book, we were very intrigued by the supernatural elements in the lore that we did receive. However, that was just a very, very, very small side dish to the entree that had been given to us. And to be honest, we wish we could have had a little bit more of that backstory in regards to Dubnos and Carmen, as well as how the Cunning Man came to be. But as we talked about this, I really considered how that additional knowledge could affect the vibe of what's going on with the characters during this time. And I kind of started to wonder exactly how the author could have worked all of that information into what was going on in the 1980s. And I think that had he done that, it would have taken away from the main focus of the story, which of course is what's going on in the neighborhood. So I think that the book is good as is, and I will say this though. I would love to see a companion book come out that elaborates a little bit more on these supernatural elements, or at least a prequel that kind of gives us a little bit more insight on how the Cunning Man came to be. But if that never happens, I'm still totally okay with this. But Christopher Golden, if you're watching, please, please, please consider like a prequel or a companion book or something like that because we would read the hell out of it. Anywho, I honestly don't feel like my review is doing this book justice because there's a lot I'm leaving out and there's quite a few other topics that this book presented that can lead to lengthy debates. It's just that with the topics I discussed, these were the ones that stood out to me the most, and if I covered everything that this book presented, I would probably be rambling on until Christmas. Overall, even though All Hallows didn't gross me out, it did actually scare me and it creeped me the hell out. Like, there were times where I ended up having to close the curtains because I felt like something was looking in at me. And if I had to go outside at night to get something out of my car, I tried to go as fast as I could and return inside and lock the door before the cunning man could get me. So, yeah, this was a lot of fun in that regards. All Hallows by Christopher Golden will stay with me for a long time due to its originality, its suspense, its drama, and its creep factor. And if you're looking for a book that will get you in the Halloween spirit while it provides some folk horror and some characters that you'll be able to just have some fun discussions about, then I do highly recommend that you read All Hallows for Halloween. Well, now that we're at the end of this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll include that as well. Also, I do have a $10 tier available where for $10 a month, I'll still give you this shout out, but I do creepy photography on the side. So at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell as I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, have a great week and sweet nightmares.